All right, so I'm outside today on this beautiful day, actually, 27 degrees. It's the first day, pretty much, I would say, of summer. And it's been really good so far. It's been really, really nice. There's a lot of things happening. But I had a thought, right? Because I told you in my last video about my concerns with software developers being burnt out. So one of the things that I realized as I was doing my Scrum Master Business Consortium 2020 was that when you go through a lot of trauma in your workplace, the Scrum Master is supposed to help you in terms of coaching. I didn't actually know that until I did the actual exam. So, you're kind of going there, you do your work and you're kind of burnt out, right? Because, another story of mine that I will tell is that I was working on a project for quite some time with the company. Now, this particular project was around upgrades within the system. And one thing that's always a bit tricky is business process. So as you go through and you do the work, so you're passionate about it, you want to understand it a bit better, and you do the work, one of the things that was interesting was essentially trying to do it in terms of what the business wants. Now, for me, I never really understood this because there are certain things which are documented, certain things which are not, but you also have to understand them, right? So, as you're trying to understand where to put things, it's not necessarily doing the work at that point, it's just understanding where to put things. And that thing, for me, was always a bit kind of strange because I'm like, oh, okay, well, this infrastructure is moving so quickly. Where do I put stuff? How do I test this? Where do I go to put this in? And it can become daunting at times because, well, when you put things in different places, nobody really knows where to put things. And I've also noticed as well in software development, just because you have a Jira ticket, which is essentially a user story, doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're building. And when you combine that with Scrum Master Consortium, basically what that is a contribution to an increment towards something called a product goal. So what is an increment to a product goal? Basically what it is that you're building out the product as you go along. So you build your Jira ticket out, you have your thing in, and that contributes as something towards a product. So unless you knew that, right, you wouldn't know what to do. And that's my biggest concern with juniors in the software industry, is that if we're not allowing juniors to even enter the industry, how will they ever understand what to do and what happens when everything has to become cohesive? So what do I mean by this? So basically, there's a couple of things that needs to be described in a company. One is, what are you building? Do you understand what you're building? Right? And the other part is, where's it going to be deployed, as well as who's going to use it? Right? So I actually got 4 things. I said 3, but I got 4. And that's the sort of thing that I think every junior should actually be thinking in their head. So, yeah, that's where it gets interesting. But nobody tells you this. You go in a company and nobody tells you this. And this is one of the reasons I think that people get burnt out, is because there's a disconnect between what is actually being said and what is actually being told. I certainly had this problem when I was in corporate. So it's another reason for me to say, right, I'm building out this project in terms of coaching, right, called the Worldwide Mental Health Project, to help not only, well, it primarily helps developers, but you don't have to be a developer to join, but or a software engineer or somebody in IT, right? But it's primarily aimed at people who are in IT, who are tackling burnout. And this is one of the reasons why you actually incur burnout, right? It's not because you didn't like the subject, it's just because you got tired of all the, well, let's face it, all the stuff that happens on the top. And sometimes that happens as a result of misunderstanding, which can lead into things like becoming less passionate about the work, which then leads into poor results. And one of the other things that I noticed as well is that I became adverse to things called performance improvement reviews. I think they're completely useless, to be honest, because I don't think they actually uplift the person. So what do I mean by that? Well, you think about it, one of the things that's interesting is that you can get put on a performance improvement review for essentially poor performance in theory, but when you look at it realistically, it's just non-compliance. So that's another thing that annoys me, because, well, if you're going to lose talent, right, if you're going to lose people there, why would you lose the tacit knowledge as well? It makes no sense. Like, if that person's been at a company for, a strong amount of time, why would you then go and say, right, okay, we need to rehire somebody? Now, yes, if they've really underperformed, I can understand. If that person's been there for a couple of years and then suddenly you're saying that they need to be on a performance improvement review, nah, that just ain't going to fly at the company. Come on, let's just be reasonable, right? There can be a significant number of changes which has happened, but at the end of the day, it's more of a business expense than anything, isn't it? Let's just be honest. So that's where I kind of got with all of that stuff. I think personally, I think you should coach somebody and basically say, right, okay, take them under your wing, right? Because if you're a Scrum Master, that's what you're supposed to be doing, and basically saying, right, okay, what are the sort of things that we can help you with? But the thing with the coaches, right, and this is the one thing that I've noticed, is that especially within the software industry, there's this kind of paranoia. It's like, oh, okay, like, I can't sit with a project for more than 1 month of a sprint, therefore why can't you, right? Or vice versa, right? You can only do it for a sprint because it's time boxed. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, well, okay, let's try and understand this, right? Technology itself is going to always move, which is fine. But at the same time, I think to myself, you're trying to build something which nobody has really built before. And here's the kicker, right? We're going towards a world which is more AI driven, right? Using stuff like WebMCP, using stuff around, wow, it's actually loud here. Let me go to the side. So we've got things like WebMCP, you've got things like, there's somebody left something in the comments and it was talking about payments using agentic agents, right? So we're moving towards that kind of world. So, what I'm finding more and more is AI in itself isn't going to replace your job. There's no way it can, right? The fundamentals don't work. Why is that? Well, think about it, right? You've got a weighting, and then you have the amount of neurons that works with the weighting. So if you've got amount of neurons that work with the weighting, the thing is, the actual neural net can only predict the next move depending on what's in the data set. Let me break that down for you. Basically, right, if I go for a plug, right, which is on an exposed wire, let's say, right, and I touch it with my hand, the prediction is I'll get electrocuted, right? Because that's a prediction, right? The prediction, but I don't know what the feeling of being electrocuted is, but the prediction is that if I put my hand on the wire, I'm going to be electrocuted, right? Some people might call that common sense, but it's lacking nowadays, so we'll just put it into context, right? So that's what happens, right? So when it comes to certain models and methodologies, the AI is predicting based upon what it understands. It's a prediction engine. It's not what these CEOs are talking about, like, oh, it's going to replace you and all this kind of... No. It is a tool fundamentally, as dictated by Linus Torvalds, and moreover, it is essentially a prediction engine. A prediction engine. Now, I think the fear is not necessarily mandated in the fact that AI will take over every single job, but the fear that the prediction models will become so sophisticated that it may inevitably lead up to that conclusion. Now, that is a fear that I think is definitely warranted. But my other problem is this. How would you get there without a human? For two reasons. One is you need somebody to maintain an AI system, or the LLM, right? Especially over things like remote procedural calls, which is going to be RPC. And then the other one is, well, how do you justify the investment for things like data centers and power, right? If you look at the tech report, for example, this is one thing that they continuously drive home, right? They continuously drive it home. And I think the recent version of the tech report was that information around, OpenAI, right? And Sam Altman going into the IPO stage was a desperate attempt to raise capital. So that's the one thing that we need to be clear here, is that it's not going to replace your job. No, if anything, it will augment your job by making you have access to a tool that you can use, which will then allow you to create a mathematical prediction of the world, right? It's a science-based tool. That's what it is. And I think if we approach it in that way, then, it keeps a level head. The thing that I agree with developers and a lot of software engineers and a lot of people out there in the market at the moment is that I don't like the way in which all of this stuff is being shoved down our throats, right? The whole AI narrative. Why? Because it's what we call snake oil, right? It's selling stuff that doesn't actually exist. Like, if I make you believe that it's AI is going to take over your job, for example, right? If I make you believe that, then you fall into the narrative of, oh, well, I have to go and buy the product, right? Which will be, Claude. It could be, Copilot. It could be anything like that. You pay a subscription, therefore I make the revenue, which means I profit from it. Do you see the psychology of this? Do you see the beauty? That's the thing, right? They got us addicted to not thinking, which leads me on to my next point. The thing with AI that I've noticed is that unless I understand, the predicate behind it, right, behind what I'm building, behind what I'm trying to do, right, then and only then can I have an accurate prediction of what I'm trying to do. The problem comes in the detail. So a lot of people on the internet are saying, oh, I'm a developer, and I've got all this experience, right? And AI is going to replace you, right? No. Why is that? Give it a large prompt. Give it a prompt whereby you need, let's say it's on the order of 100,000 tokens. Maybe 320,000 tokens. Give it a prompt of 320,000 tokens, right? Then tell me it's going to take over my job. Tell me that. Go on. I'll give you a minute. You done? Okay, cool. Because here's what I found out, right? When I gave AI a large context or a large context window, what happens is it hallucinates and it puts all the information into memory. Now, as it's doing all of that, what happens? It gets confused. Why? Because AI is a prediction engine. It makes predictions based upon what I've told it. So what's it trying to do? It's trying to analyze everything that's in that context for an answer to a question that I gave it. Now, this could be logs. This could be, errors that happen within the system, right? But the one thing that I have to do with AI is I have to ensure that in the thinking window, right, of the context, it doesn't trip up over itself, right? And where does that come from? That comes from knowledge, right, about what we're trying to build. Because if we didn't have knowledge about what we're trying to build, we would exhaust the tokens, we would exhaust, right, our capacity to think, and it would drive us to frustration. So here's what I've been saying, right, for this entire channel. AI, it has to be symbiotic. It has to be a way of essentially having one's own ideals about what they think the actual answer is to a question that is being posed towards AI, and the reality of the information which is out there, right? I think, when we see a lot of web developers out there nowadays using AI, right? But if they don't understand the basics of web technologies like HTML, right, and power graphs and headers and all that kind of stuff, there's no way that they would understand what they're building is actually a web page in hypertext transport. Hypertext markup language. Got there in the end. Hypertext markup language, right? For a basic web page, right? No CSS, no nothing, right? No cascading style sheets. If that's the case, then we know that, whatever happens in terms of an error being produced inside of that context window has only to be about HTML. Yeah? Makes sense now, doesn't it? Yeah, so there you go. I hope that made sense. It's a nice 15 minutes there in terms of the video. If you want to learn more, you can book a session with me at the Worldwide Mental Health Project, where I'll be dealing with software engineers and IT engineers in terms of dealing with things like burnout and understanding a little bit more about the management hierarchies that happen within an organization. So my name's Danny. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Appreciate it.